Ready, your life.
Okay, here I am in my office. I'm Johnny Golden of this podcast, Mental Health Enlightened. And I have my friend here, Paul Castiglione, good friend, and he's going to introduce himself. How do you like that?
Nice. Thanks, Johnny. Great to be here with you. I'm here at the Batch Cafe in actually Shenango Forks, which is just outside of Binghamton, New York.
Okay.
And Johnny and I go way back. I have done a lot of different kinds of projects and jobs in my career. So I don't know, I guess most recently I've been really intentional about trying to be helpful in building community. One of my projects was called Open Kitchens, which was a platform for dinner and conversation events, pop-up dinner events, partnered primarily with immigrant or global food, immigrant chefs, I would say. But I have a long career as a marketing for technology companies.
And you love community.
And I love community.
Your middle name, I think, is Community, Paul Community Castiglione, right?
I'll take it, man. Yes.
And we have a big focus on community. We have a focus on loneliness, and we have a focus on, and all three of these things go together, on a third place. So, Paul, why don't you kick off our discussion about a third place or any of those three things?
Yeah. I mean, third place has been on my mind for quite some time. I mean, obviously, around one of the projects that I worked on was really this idea. Like, I thought a lot about whether we needed, one more third place in the world,
Okay.
Or whether we take a different approach, which is what we ultimately did with this idea of pop-ups,
Yeah.
and looking to better or to offer more opportunity for people to gather in community around existing public spaces. So Open Kitchens, for example, we met in, religious organization spaces, churches and so
Or
forth.
people's
Public
homes. You did one
people's
at my
homes.
house. You did an
Yes.
Ethiopian thing at my house. My God.
Yeah, no, the very first event was at one of my neighbors' homes in Somerville. So yeah, also restaurants, coffee shops. We had it in lots of different. There are public spaces that are underutilized, and I think, in fact, there was just a report put out by Emmanuel Gospel Center in Boston,
Yeah.
where they highlighted the facts that Christian churches are starting to recognize that they have these amazing spaces, many of them in downtown centers that are not being utilized. They estimate that they're utilized 15% of the time. And so they're have an initiative to explore how these wonderful spaces can be better used for community purposes.
Yeah. And talk about some of the community purposes that you would immediately think of. I can hear some problems. I see some potential drawbacks to the church space. One is that they're not going to serve alcohol, I think, right? Two is they're not going to be open, pretty much all the time, I think. One of the things we would like to have is either a cafe or a pub that's open late, which was much more common before COVID. And also that, owner, well, first of all, there's much more chain cafes. And a chain cafe isn't likely to be able or want to or have the flexibility to make itself available in that way. And I think that's sort of true with bars. They're really competitive now, or they're up against the wall, and they're having to maximize what their profits. So things that add time, I guess, without a lot of income can be, difficult. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah. So yes, and I believe that there are pathways through. So I think this temptation to kind of close off potential opportunities based upon kind of the way things have been in the past, I think
Yeah.
limit us in ways that I don't think need to limit us. I think opening it up. So we did have Open Kitchens events at beer uh, microbrewery
Yeah.
places, for example,
Yeah.
and also smaller kind of coffee shops and cafes
Yeah.
where they typically close for public business earlier in the day.
Yeah.
Um, but if there are ways for them to be able to, increase awareness in sales in off
Yeah.
hours,
Right.
I think some are interested, some aren't. But it's asking the question and it's exploring. And I'll just one more point related to the coffee shop idea is that
Yeah.
in Greece, for example, during the 2008 financial crisis that they had in Greece, it was devastating to incomes. And
Yeah.
so what they found is that people were going out to dinner much less because they couldn't afford it because of the financial crisis. But
Right.
what cafes did is they stayed open later, to midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, to be
Yeah.
able to serve customers who wanted to come in, who wanted to gather in cafes where they didn't have to pay for expensive meals, but they
Right.
could pay for coffee, and they also served alcohol in those cafes as well. But they're
Right.
just a great third space, and I loved it. I was inspired sitting in cafes in Kalamata in the Peloponnese in Greece, on the public square, where there was just loads of people that were around, lots of chatting that was going on. And it was local people who were there as well as tourists.
You were
Both
there
of
in
them.
2008. You were there in 2008.
No, I was there just a few months ago, but
Yeah.
this concept of cafes being open later and people gathering in those cafes were initiated after the
Oh,
2008 financial crisis.
and it's
So
still going on.
their
Yeah.
culture shifted
Wow.
in this kind of unique way. And I think this is my invitation for us is to be open to ways in which our culture and the way we think about business can shift as well here.
Well, the thing about what you were just saying, the thing that's really key, that sounds beautiful, really beautiful. The idea that people can just show up, right? They're not waiting for an email about about coming on a certain time. They know, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the tricky things, is events are one way for people, to
Yeah.
be able to decide that, hey, this is the moment to gather.
Right.
But that also brings up, and then being open is another way for people to be able to gather. But that also brings up a point about how do we gather?
Yeah.
Priya Parker's book, for example, is, we have these ways in which we've historically gathered, like you show up
Mhm.
to a wedding shower, kind of what to expect. But
Right.
there is this invitation for us to gather in new ways, and even in unexpected ways. And so to your point, like new ways of business, but also new ways of gathering too. Like how do we open ourselves to spontaneous gathering or events?
Well, what would be besides what you experienced in Greece? What would be, and besides some of the events you put on, but what would be a really good example that you experienced, like for example, as an undergrad, maybe, or when you were working in corporate life, or when you were in the army? Was there places that people would just show up on a regular basis and have fun?
Yeah, Air Force, actually,
Oh
not
yeah, the
Army.
Air Force.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean, the things that inspired me, around with open kitchens is like when I traveled, um, mostly on vacation, but also with business too.
Yeah.
Thinking about those times where, you know, I would go to a restaurant or, some public space where I would meet people who I didn't know, who are from different places around the world, and I'd get into these really connective conversations, uh,
Hmm.
very deep conversations.
Oh, it's gonna happen. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, that's what inspired me around open kitchens is this idea of like, offering people meals from, global food, in spaces for them to engage in conversations and meet people that they wouldn't meet in their neighborhood or in their workspace. So I don't know, that was one of those inspiring, and I experienced it when I was in Greece. I saw
Oh
someone walk
yeah.
by with a Red Sox hat on,
Yeah. Right.
in where was I?
And what time would you
Pilos.
usually? At what time would you usually show up, Paul? You said it was like late, or was it open before that?
Uh, well, I mean, most of these kinds of gatherings that I'm talking about are
I mean,
over
the
a
ones in
meal.
Greece, the Greece
Yeah.
cafe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in Greece, so it was. So some people I actually met on the beach, but otherwise, the more intentional gatherings, like, hey, let's meet for X, was around food typically. So either, breakfast or dinner.
Uh-huh.
Those were the times that I, kind of met folks. In my day to day, I mean, I might meet them for coffee midday sometime, but meals are really, I've found very connective.
Yeah, yeah. But when you went to the cafes, that's what I was asking. The ones that had decided to
Oh,
become open. Yeah. What time was that usually at?
after dinner,
Okay. Okay. And they would
so
stay open late, right?
yeah, and they stayed open. I mean, I didn't stay out that late, but yeah, I
Yeah.
think they were open to midnight, 1 o'clock, something
Yeah.
like that. But the
And
point
we,
is like, and after they were open after dinner for, for people to gather and meet. Yeah.
right. And we've lost that stuff. I mean, we've lost a lot of it after COVID about places staying open late, right? There used to be cafes that would stay open really late.
Um, like the way coffee culture has
Yeah.
evolved in the U.S.
Yeah.
I don't. I think they typically close at 2, 3 o'clock, maybe 4 o'clock. Typically, I found in recent decades.
Right.
Um,
No, there's one
so
place that's open until 8. I mean, the place is open until 8 and stuff. But anyway,
that's
you know,
that's.
but
I mean, my experience is pretty rare. Just in terms of cafes,
yeah, yeah,
bars are typically open later in the
yeah,
U.S. There's a whole kind of bar culture. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, talk about the pub culture. Well, also, let's just talk for a moment and explain what the basic understanding of a third place is. The third place is a place other than home or work, correct?
Right. And yeah. Other than home or work, right? The third place. And I'm just what I was bouncing around in my head is does it actually include an opportunity for connection?
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a general kind of feel for that when people think about third place.
Right.
Um,
Well,
but
the
but I
thing,
will.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say. I mean, Somerville, Massachusetts, has been really intentional about having conversations within the community because they found that third spaces were closing post COVID.
Right.
Like for example, in Somerville, they have the Arsenal, like the
Oh, yeah.
former Arsenal, that has been opened for public events. And there are people who are very, interested, kind of lean activists who might invest their own personal wealth in creating a public space. In
Okay.
Somerville, there was a couple of those. But Somerville was very intentional about recognizing that, a robust democracy requires these third
That's
spaces.
right. That's right.
And the events might be artistic events, they might be gathering spaces. Yeah. So I think like I wonder, I mean, it just feels like there's an opportunity for, city government
Oh, yeah.
to
Yeah.
play
Yeah,
a role
definitely.
in that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was actually fantasizing last night and thinking about this program today. That what if I could go? What if we, whatever, could go to the city of Arlington, for example, and encourage them to, I don't know, open a place that may or may not exist already, but there would be like a really intentional and dedicated space for something like this. Was just one idea, but I guess again, the issue of government sponsorship or at least funding, initial funding.
Well,
Um, yeah.
again, I mean, I think like, this, we're entering into a season where, creativity is going to be required, creativity and inspiration.
Yeah.
Because I think there's plenty of opportunities. Like, for example, I joined the American Legion here.
Ah,
As you mentioned, I'm a veteran. And so I joined the American Legion. They have this awesome space. It's actually, uh, previously was a mansion of one of the titans of the first industry here in Binghamton, New York, which was cigar making, cigar
Okay.
manufacturing in the early
Okay.
19th century, and was purchased by one of the founders of the second generation industry, shoemaking here in this
Okay.
area, intentionally for the American Legion. So the American Legion is one of those organizations that formed at the turn of the 20th century. And there's lots of them, Boy Scouts,
Right.
Boys and Girls
VFW.
Club,
Yeah.
Rotary Club, you know,
Lions Club. Lions Club. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
let me
where
interject for a second.
they have third spaces
Right. Well, let me
all across the
interject because,
country.
yeah. Well, you just remind, I mean, this sounds, I don't know, artificial, but actually I was thinking last night of an American Legion or a place like it because they're really, I've been in those places a little bit.
Yeah,
You have a nice, well, first of all, they have bars inside. And
they
they
do.
have,
Yeah,
right, and they have a nice, like wooden kind of feeling. There's a lot of wood paneling. It has that
it
warmth.
varies, but yeah,
Yeah.
because
And
a lot of
so,
them are older, right? They were built in the first half of the 20th century. Yeah,
right, that's right. And yeah, and of course they have a lot of space that's not used. I've been to a concert once or twice in
oh,
American Legion
cool.
Hall. And yeah, so that would be an excellent idea. All right. And we're giving that away to our audience here. We're just giving that away, that idea. Right?
It's information, totally.
Yeah, giving away information. What about in terms of loneliness? 'Cause let me hold up this famous document, okay, which is, let me get it straight.
Yeah, no, that
Yeah,
I can see it.
there it is, straight. It's yeah, it's from the Surgeon General from 2023, our epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And I think you and I, Paul, know about that, correct?
Yeah, totally.
And like this time of the year is a time actually where a lot of people feel more lonely
Yep.
in the face of the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, particularly like both you and I are divorced men, right?
Right,
And, with grown children. And
right,
so, yeah. And we're in a mobile society, I mean, I happen to be living with my elderly folks right at the moment, but,
right,
but otherwise, like out of three siblings, two of us moved away to other areas away from where our family was
right.
established,
That's
and my
right.
family. So
Right.
yeah, loneliness, big, big, big challenge. Unless you have chosen family, like I feel like we've become chosen family, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And what about like, so how would you see third place responding and kind of, yeah, an antidote to the loneliness?
Yeah, dude. This is where this aspect of creativity comes in because the way the culture is currently structured, well, I'll just speak for me. I find, the way I've found my place in current culture is, and by place, I mean, feeling good about myself,
Yeah.
feeling good about my status, my place in the world, my economic well-being, like this, like feeling at home, really, basically. The way many of my peers feel is, and I've felt for most of my life, prior to being inspired to focus on community, is really this idea of like where I find my self-worth, my settled home is work,
Yeah.
primarily as a,
Yeah.
and maybe it's particularly, yeah, anyway, so work,
Yeah.
and 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 really that's, honestly, that's probably it, or maybe the gym, maybe sports leagues,
Yeah.
um but that's really it. Not even my neighborhood anymore. Like like I didn't know my neighbors in most of the places that I lived, when I was focused on my corporate job,
Right.
so I didn't need to please, the baker or the, butcher or anyone else. Like I didn't
Yeah.
need to actually be intentional relationship with them because I was relying upon their business for me. No, I had
Yeah.
a corporate job. All I had to please was my corporate overlords, you know, my boss, and the community in which I worked, which was typically remote. So there wasn't anyone local that I had to be intentional about having community for my livelihood. And
Right.
so so the way I connected was really through work.
And
You
well,
know,
and then
historic.
the second, yeah, I mean, so that's place number one.
Yeah.
Place number two would be home, I guess, right?
Well, I mean, for me personally, yeah, I mean, but my home, I'm a divorced guy, so my home
Oh,
was
you
my
already told.
daughter,
Okay.
you know. But I mean, the other place that I found satisfaction outside of work was church, and that was really the first place that I formed really safe, trusted, life-giving relationships
Okay.
outside of college. So I didn't
Okay.
develop trusted relationships at work. I had lots of acquaintances, but
Right.
I realized once I started forming friendships in a safe, spiritual community, um, until I started seeing those relationships, I realized my work relationships were superficial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though I thought they were real at the time, and I have a large network. I had a large network of work related, what I called friends, but really more acquaintances and more of a kind of a professional network. So yeah, I mean, so really it was just work. And I think for many people, men especially, I think they find their connection at work. And I think many men feel like it's superficial. I
Yeah.
know people who are like, who come to me and say, my relationship with you is the only real relationship that I have.
Right.
Like former, professional network
And
folks.
what do you say back to them? What do you say when they say that? Or what do you
I
think?
said, yeah, I say thank you. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Um, and I recognize that it's epidemic, you know.
Yes. That's right. And yeah,
I mean,
for
that's
those
not,
of us, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's not everybody, but
No,
that's
of course.
many
Yeah.
of the people who I know.
Yeah. I mean, an epidemic doesn't have to be everybody. It just means, vastly increasing. And that's what he's pinpointing. Also, the fact that it has an effect on the overall public health of individuals and of the society. You know, the loneliness thing has a lot of effect on individuals, on their physical health, as well
Yeah.
as, of course, mental health. But yeah, well, I got a lot of that at some points from synagogue, from Jewish organizations. Some of the stuff you're talking about, real closeness. Other times it's stuff I had to create. But
Mm-hmm.
I created this thing called Rush, Rise Up Singing in Harmony, Rise Up Singing in Harmony. And but it was only once a month. And it would be a potluck dinner in somebody's house, which would alternate, rotate. I was the coordinator. And then we would all, after eating, schmoozing, we'd sit around and sing songs. Everybody had a particular songbook. And the songbook was called Rise Up Singing. Hence, that's how I came up with the name. But this was like pretty easy to create in Amherst, Massachusetts, where I used to live. Because soon after I moved there, I saw everybody had that songbook in their house. So that was an easy idea. But I'm talking what I really imagine. Yes, I had another fantasy last night besides American Legion. I remembered about an incredible pub, an English style pub in California that's located right on Muir Beach in Marin County, California. And it is a basement, really dark pub inside of an inn. That's right. It's part of an inn, and it's going to be at the basement, you might say, of the inn. I was supposed to look it up this morning. I couldn't remember, but maybe maybe Paul, you can look it up while I'm talking. Anyway, the place I was there the last time I was in California was maybe um, what was it the time? Yeah, it was when I saw you, whenever that was, when you were living in South Shore.
Oh,
All right,
cool.
yeah. And so I went and spent one night. Um, no, I was spending a couple nights in Marin. Anyway, I went to that spot and I stayed for quite a few hours, and I ate and drank, and it was incredibly community oriented. Even though these were like basically tourists, but the atmosphere, I think they had darts, the whole thing. The atmosphere created, the ambience. The ambience was all about being in a special place that was not the same as other places. It has an atmosphere of all of its own. And part of that is because of the architecture, you might say, the design. Um, Bartenders were amazing. Very small place. So what I would really like to see are more places like that. Because most bars you go into now, yeah, and it was relatively quiet. It was relatively sedate, um, or at least you could talk, you could hear yourself. Um, I think we need something like that as well, and we need like the English style pub, which is pretty much that's what this was modeled after slightly. But tell me your experiences. I'm sure you've had them in English style pubs, either in the UK or here or whatever.
Well, let me ask you a question. Like, did you meet people when you were at that place in Marin County?
Yes, I was just there for one evening. I met some amazing people, but
Interesting. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
right. But we were all, I believe we were all there as visitors. I got to know the bartenders too. No, but we had some really great conversations. I think it was, my typical existentialist conversation or something.
Yeah,
Just deep
love that.
stuff. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't the Red Sox. It was really deep stuff. You know. Um,
Well,
yeah.
so I mean, the reason I bring that up is, I mean, this is one of the, I feel like one of the challenges of gathering, because I really believe that we need part of the process of developing third spaces is thinking about how people connect with each other, how people initially connect and then build relationships
Yeah.
over time. And and the reason I bring that up is, I feel like I'm both an extrovert and an introvert.
Okay.
And you're, I would guess, are an extrovert.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we connect more easily with people
Yes.
than introverts. So thinking about third spaces that are welcoming to introverts and extroverts,
Absolutely.
you know, I,
Absolutely. And all
it's got to be
ages.
part of the
And all
conversation.
ages. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the thing that's really key is things being multi-generational.
I'd like
Multi-generational,
that.
which you see a lot in other countries. In Latin America, where I've been a lot, everything is done multi-generational. It's not this separate, every 10 years we have a new generation here because they're marketing, they have to do niche marketing to every little 10-year group, right? Um, but yeah. Well, one thing we haven't quite said yet, which we need to go back to basics, is that the third place is like one place is the home, number two is work, and then the third place is the whole idea, which is you don't just go to work and back home right away. You got a third place to go before you come home after work. Let's say, in that typical model. And what does that do besides creating community? It also creates less conflict at home, probably, or less stress, less pressure that you've already had a chance to relate to other people. You're not relying on your wife, your spouse, your friend, whatever. You're not only relying on them for a source of connection. You've got other people to rely on.
Yeah, yes, and this is like back to this idea of like we needed to retrain ourselves, because I think about my daughter and her generation. Um, she's very intentional, and she's an extrovert. She's very intentional about forming new relationships, or has been, in you know communities that she's settled as she starts her career.
Yeah.
Um, People, but I think I get the sense that she's somewhat unique, because a lot of, I actually be interesting to talk to her about this. Her generation might be more intentional about it,
Yeah.
but all to say is like, why don't we stop someplace on the way home? Like,
Yeah.
my generation would stop and we would have a beer after work. And so, those were my, work hard, play hard, was this mantra at that time,
Yeah. But did you see
which,
the same people often? I mean, was there kind of
yeah,
a usual
it was my
flow?
workmates.
I was at the workplace or what? No,
No,
I
no, no,
meant,
no. It
yeah,
was at a bar.
yeah,
I guess let me just finish this thought, which is,
yeah,
I think there's a bit of a retraining. So this idea of just making a third space available
Yeah,
isn't going to cause people to start developing a habit of
yes,
stopping at the third
yeah,
place between work and home. I
you're
think
right.
there
Yeah,
has to be a retraining that's involved, and it's possibly has to be. I love your idea around multi-generational, um, and I think there has to be an intentionality around thinking how it meets the needs of each generation.
okay. Um, so,
Just a
but
thought.
in the situation you were talking about, the people who would go have a beers together were people from your work or just random people, or you would run into other people or what?
Yeah, so it'd be my workmates would say, "Hey, we're going to meet at this bar," and so
Yeah,
we would leave work and then go to this bar, and there were other people
yeah,
that were at this bar. Yeah,
okay. And the thing about intentionality you're talking about, though, I think the other way of looking at it in terms of your daughter's generation is that they have to get past the way I think about it is like when I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right after college, right? What I have this memory, and it might be a little bit exaggerated, was you could just show up at somebody's house, have dinner, just show up, not even have an initial phone call. Of course, this is before email and before all those other aspects of communication. You could just show up and there might be a party going on and you've just shown up. So you're already accustomed to breaking through barriers. And my daughter's generation, there's a lot of texting, there's a lot of limits to how you meet people. There's a lot of kind of bureaucracy and unstated rules about how to meet people in a civilized way. And there's a lot of rules of the game.
yeah, I think those things are developed for safety's sake. Um, you know,
But it
like
does
in
make it does make things less spontaneous, though, Paul.
oh, totally, yeah. I'm not arguing with it. I'm just telling you,
Yeah,
I this is the way. Like having spent some time focusing on how to be helpful in building community,
yeah,
safety is a huge issue,
oh, yeah,
perceived or otherwise.
yes,
Um, I think so many people feel unsafe in general. Like there's, you know, um, surveys that have been done that it's like 60% of people don't trust their neighbors. I mean, there's like tons of research. There's this perception that the world is unsafe, and so a lot of the rules that you're talking about have been developed to help people feel safe. You know.
but people feeling unsafe. What is the likely obvious outcome of that? Even, I mean, let's say they feel unsafe, but it's really like it's not objectively caused, but it kind of, of course, it leads to loneliness, increases loneliness, and then it reinforces loneliness. If you're feeling,
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so we've got to break down loneliness and safety and all that, like knowing your neighbors, obviously, that goes hand in hand.
Yeah, but I guess where I'm going with this is as we think about third space,
Yeah,
safety is a part of that conversation.
yeah,
And 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 rather than blaming, like we can't blame the victim for feeling unsafe. You know what I
right.
mean? We can't blame the person who's feeling unsafe for their feeling of being unsafe that's leading to their own loneliness. Like that isn't gonna that isn't gonna create the spaces that we're hoping to create. Somehow we have to invite them, and through their experiences of pushing beyond their comfort zone, they're
Yes.
experiencing love and beauty, and suddenly their trust is then grown over time that they're then
Yeah.
willing to engage.
Well, familiarity, I mean, when you were talking about not knowing your neighbors, so like familiarity is a huge part of it. Like, like that's why the third space was a regular, generally a regular crowd, Then there's familiarity, then there's less, more safety and familiarity.
Yeah, totally.
And
I,
yeah,
no, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like reading Robert Putnam's work, I've been doing a lot of research this year. And so,
Okay.
Robert Putnam, wrote the book Bowling Alone, and then he
Yeah.
wrote an update, follow
Yeah.
on to it in 2020.
Yeah.
Um, he, one of the things he talks about, uh, uh, this is both the beautiful thing about getting older and the challenge of getting older. I lost my train of thought. My
Okay. Well, I'll
thoughts
jump in.
come
Let me
slower.
jump in for a second.
Yeah.
Why don't you explain a little bit about Bowling Alone, which is a famous book, and the title is it's such an incredible metaphor. It's like you can basically see the essence of what it's about just hearing the title. So tell us more about it.
Yeah, thanks. And the thought came back. Thank you for that, Johnny. So,
Okay.
bowling alone is this idea of, really through the first half of the 20th century, uh, we built more and more ways to be communal. Everything from the PTA to, those things that I talked about earlier, American Legion and so forth. But then in 1970, with the me generation, which is your generation, actually, I'm a little bit younger than you.
Yeah.
Um, there was a shift, and that me generation was really about rebellion. And what was your generation rebelling against? You were rebelling against conformity,
Yeah.
because there were all of these communities that existed, but your generation was like, hey, those communities no longer feel good. They
Right.
feel too restrictive to me.
Right.
And if you look at what those organizations were, they were typically aligned with a specific race, specific gender, a specific set of rules, like how do I dress, how do I, and so there was this, long hair, bell-bottom jeans was very different than, high and tight haircuts and, sport coats and ties.
Yeah.
So, so there was a reason for the rebellion. It was really pushing against the conformity of those existing communities. Well,
Hmm.
now fast forward 50 years, and you were recognizing that, hey, having total individuality, is only resulting in the fears I have against, community,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, it leads
and
to
so
loneliness. I mean,
and it,
hyper individuality is very in tune or very uh, in sync with increased loneliness.
yeah, it's a core
Yeah.
ingredient of
Yeah.
loneliness. Yeah, totally. And so as we kind of develop a neo community, a new way of doing community, um, my hypothesis is that it will necessarily will be inclusive. It will have
Yeah.
an aspect of diversity that
Yeah.
is going to be part of it. So I
Yeah.
don't need to dress a certain way. I don't need to have my hair, I'm welcoming to people of different, backgrounds,
Right.
ideas, races, genders, and so forth. I think that's necessarily going to be a part of this neo community. And I think you and I think would agree on this. I think the way through is going to be humanities, arts, this kind of
Mhm.
creative, where I have space to be creative.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wonder.
No, and you and I are people who are extremely inclusive, extremely able to cross bridges of any kind. I mean, I know that you are. I know that I am. I could talk to anybody in any kind of
Totally,
situation and make a connection.
totally.
Which is, it's hard for me to understand why most people can't do that. But do you remember the film Network from 1976 with
For sure.
oh, sure. Okay, that's the one where they open the windows. They're in New York City, and everybody's very isolated. Everybody's very pissed off too. And the famous line is, "I'm mad as hell, and I won't take it anymore." Do you remember that
Pathetic.
line? Yeah, was
I
that?
remember that line. I don't remember the movie, but very
Yeah. Well,
pathetic.
that line, the movie was also about the media. Well, that is right. God, that is very relevant because there's also a big part of it was about the media manipulation of people's feelings of their fears, and
Mhm.
also about the media doing anything to gain ratings, to get more popular. So there was a real tragic ending where they wanted to have a suicide live, on TV, and I can't remember whether that happened or not. But it was the idea of taking television. At that point, it was just television, network television, to its ultimate absurdity. You know, and at the same time, there were people knowing that that was dangerous. One of the main character, actually. So he started this quote movement of people, at a certain time of the day, everybody was opening their window and yelling, "I'm mad as hell." And then it was like, "We're mad as hell." And, I mean, when you think about the isolation and how it also, jumping into politics for a second, leads to extremism because people can believe in any kind of conspiracy thing, can totally distrust neighbors, distrust the system, distrust all the institutions, maybe distrust the bowling alley. Maybe they're bowling an alley. Maybe they're bowling alone because they don't trust the bowling alley. The point being that when things break down, which you've talked about, we talked about, society breaks down, institutions are suspect, people don't have trust in each other, institution, definitely leads to political extremism and violence. So, what we're talking about, Paul, is not just, a icing on the cake. It is the cake. We're talking about the cake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just riffing off of that, I think what I appreciate about you, and I put myself in the same camp, is that we have this way of seeing the world in which we see this need, right?
Yeah,
And I think it's not just us pursuing our passion.
right.
Um, it is us taking responsibility for um, for executing on what we see as a need in the world,
Yes,
because we're uniquely positioned to do it. Not everybody sees the world as we see it. And
right.
so it's really our responsibility to be able to make effort to move forward in the ways that we need to see the world change. We can't just sit back and say, oh, yeah, we'll just wait for the world to change. It's our responsibility because we have a unique way of seeing the world. And it's not just you and I, Johnny, but everyone who has this kind of unique vision
Yeah,
and seeing this need in the world need to take responsibility for moving forward on it. We just can't sit back for another generation and say, oh, yeah, things will change when they change. We
yeah.
have to take responsibility for it.
Have you told your daughter that? I mean, in other words, does she know that you're trying your best to make it a better world? A better
Oh,
world.
yeah, yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she says to me, Dad, I'm so proud of, the work that you're doing. And I'm like, really? Because it feels like, like I've been laboring, off in the weeds, like
Yeah,
I'm not seeing the outcome of my labors. I'm not seeing
right.
success for, my labors. But I think that what I'm realizing, when we take responsibility for what we are seeing in the world and move forward in the ways that we're able to, outcome doesn't matter,
Yeah,
because we can't know what is coming. And
right.
I believe the world is shifting in a way that the groundwork, the plowing that we're doing right now, based upon our passion and what we see,
Yeah,
is creating an environment for things to sprout. Maybe not even in our lifetimes. We may not see it, but the work that we do is necessary in order for um, when things shift, for there to be soil that's prepared for growth. And I'll just add one more example of this. I was working with the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization around some of their legislative initiatives,
yeah,
criminal justice reform and healthcare reform, and it was a real slog to get people to want to show up to these big organized events
yeah,
to hold politicians accountable.
yeah.
Until suddenly there was a series of activities. George Floyd, COVID
Um,
hit, and
yeah,
all of a sudden there's this huge groundswell of support. So when it was really difficult to get people to show up, for these different activities and actions that we were taking,
yeah,
um, it suddenly became really easy. And the actions that we're taking, thousands of people join, not hundreds of people. And so the groundwork that we had laid prepared us for when the environment shifted, and we could then move in a much easier way. So
Yeah.
all our hard work, Johnny, just to encourage us, will not be in vain, because I believe there is a shift coming, and we need to do the work now to be able to have things prepared for that shift.
Yeah. The thing is, I think, Paul, you're a more optimistic person than I am, I believe. But anyway, that's okay. Because for me, besides all that, well, I'm a psychotherapist, but I've also had to do a lot of therapy for myself, and internal, not just seeing a therapist, but wrestling with mental health issues. I mean, nothing on the intense, nothing on the extreme range, but loneliness has been a factor in my life much longer than this report was written. And the thing is
Mm-hmm.
that most people, so I'm going back to the loneliness thing again, that most people see it as a stigma. Most people will not admit that they feel lonely. I mean, it's one of the last stigmas, right? Poverty and loneliness are two of the last stigmas, right? And so there's not, it's really hard to find an effective way to deal with that in a regular way without having a life partner, without having an extended family nearby. So for me, things like a third place are basically essential. But when they're not happening, it's a real, it's a real gap. It's a real, a void, a real void. One of the ones that I had recently, Paul, that you knew about, I was taking that playwriting course. And one of the things that made it so good was where it was located at. It was given at Arlington High School, which is a completely new building. It was only completed, this is Arlington, Massachusetts, completed, I think, a year and a half ago. And inside that building, you would say to yourself, God damn, if I could have gone to a high school like this, I'd be a Nobel Prize winner, at least Nobel,
Nice.
because it has everything you could imagine. And not only that, in terms of for the individual, but it is totally designed, totally designed for community. I mean, really to the last degree, to the last, nail or something. So just going there felt very enlivened, very inspiring. And then I was in a class with, a workshop type class. It's called Adult Community Education, with just 6 or 7 of us. And so, I knew I was doing that every Tuesday night. It was a thing I knew I was going to do. Because when you don't have a set third place, when you don't have a set third place that you know, and you don't have a wife or partner waiting for you at home or a kid, um, then what happens to me is at some point during the day, I'm thinking, what am I going to do after I finish work? And you're kind of reinventing the wheel, reinventing the wheel. There's other options besides the playwriting thing, but what I really would love is a really stabilized, community oriented, multi generational, very, very spontaneous, very relaxed, very informal. It has to be informal. That's definite. It has to be informal. In other words, so that there's no barriers, there's no, there's no exam to get in, there's no entrance exam. It's just open play. Um, I mean, one barrier would be, you can't let in people who are disruptive or violent or things like that. But other than that, it's just an open place. And that's something that would be, glorious for me. Let me say one thing. There is a place I can think of in Boston. There's probably many more, but it's the only live every day, every night jazz place, jazz cafe, and it's in the South End, and it's very simple. It's just one room, and there's really great jazz people, not famous, but basically local, I think. And the whole room is people there for jazz. And there's a bar, but the whole room is very narrow. and you have to meet people just by design. Um, and they actually don't serve food, which is, too bad, but it makes it simple. So people are going there to really listen to jazz, right? But they are talking. They're not restricted in any way. And it's open every night, and it's always jazz every night. That's a third place. That's a third place because you know what you're going for. You know what's going to be there,
Totally.
but you're going to meet new people. I mean, it's not the same people every night, but you're definitely going to meet people. You're going to meet people for sure because you're just sitting in a sense where they're going to, you're going to meet. And there's also restaurants where they've done, um, what's that called when you have family seating, but it's bigger than a family, like a
Yeah,
long
yeah,
table,
family style. Yep.
family
Yeah.
style. Yeah, that creates community too.
Yeah.
Um, we need a lot. We need that as as much more of a norm, much more of a norm.
Well, everything you're saying, I mean, those are great examples of third place. Yeah, totally. And there's what I hear, some of the things that I've heard you say is really this invitation to kind of like open conversation. And
Yeah,
conversation is only one way for people to gather. Now, you and I are very comfortable with conversation, so we're seeking that out. But not
yes,
everybody seeks that out. So, part of this idea of, inclusiveness is having lots of different ways for people to be able to gather. Playwriting
right,
course, class, that's
right,
awesome. Jazz club,
yeah,
beautiful. Like these are all great examples of third place.
yeah. And the last time I was at Wally's, that's the name of the place. You're gonna like this because this was not a conversation of a way. It was a conversation that led to this, and it's something maybe only I would do. Um, I told these late women, they were college students. They were all really fun, and they were from Northeastern. I told them that when I meet people, um, that I often want to do an arm wrestling, and they were all really strong. They were all very strong. So I ended up like arm wrestling about three or four of them, and then a guy came. I wrestled some guys too, but it was just a way of having something different happen, and there was a lot of humor. It really opened up a connection, and it wasn't meant to be competitive or in any way, whatever. But I think doing something outside the box, which I do a lot, is
Yeah.
another way. Okay, go ahead.
No, you're good at that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. Um, we've got a lot of talents, Paul. You and I, we got a lot of talents. Um, I've been begging you to come back to the Boston area, but I know what you're doing is valuable and important. Um, I assume you're seeing that value, right?
I am. I am. And it's a season. Yeah, thanks for that, though. I appreciate the encouragement.
Was that meeting of the family a good meeting?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, it was very good.
It was good. Yeah,
I think my parents felt loved and recognized that they were supported.
good.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And can you say something more about that cafe that you're sitting in?
Yeah.
About the cafe? Yeah.
So I don't know a lot. And I'll also mention that I'm losing battery. So I don't know how long
Okay.
I'll just keep talking until my phone dies. But if I
Well,
drop
you
off,
see, if it
that's what
was a good
happened.
community, wait a minute, if it was a really good community, people would be carrying batteries for you right now. Somebody would have a battery and they'd
Possibly.
be offering a battery. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
But
No, this was started by a couple of guys. It was funded by their parents, from what I understand.
okay.
So it was a communal, kind of a familial communal effort to be able to build this. And they just opened up a second location, kind of on the other side of the county. But part of what they do is they roast meat, so they have
Yeah.
their own kind of recipe.
Roastery.
And yeah, I'm not sure if they've I don't know them well enough to know if they've entered competitions and so forth, but the
Okay.
coffee here is really good, and it's a cool space, and they've got a food menu, kind of egg sandwiches and other kinds of sandwiches,
Right.
but with nice high quality. They have a bakery here, so bagels, so forth.
Okay.
So yeah, and there's actually recently been a number of different cafes that have opened here locally, and so I mean again, this kind of what my experience in Greece was recently. I
Yeah.
would love to see
Oh yeah.
this kinds of spaces be used for the kind of third space that you're talking about, Johnny.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we'll
and
see. Stay tuned.
good. And do people mostly take it to go, or are they mostly eating in there?
It's a mix. I mean, right here, I mean, there's quite a large public university here.
Right.
I think it's the biggest public
Yeah.
university in New York State here locally. So there's what I'm guessing are students working here, but there's others who I've seen work here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's got a big kind of um, space for people to be able to work. Yeah.
Right. Is there entertainment? Is there any entertainment there?
I haven't seen kind of intentionality around helping people connect with one another. I haven't seen any
No,
efforts along
I
that
mean
line.
performers. I meant performers, like
Yeah, or
concerts.
no, I
Yeah,
haven't seen any art. I mean, there's this bit of artwork behind me, but I'm
I
not.
see that.
There,
Yeah.
there isn't. I don't see them supporting the arts in any way
Yeah.
at the moment. I
Right.
don't know.
Right.
They've only been around for a couple of years, I think. What
Okay.
I've heard.
Yeah. Well, I want to just say
But
behind. Go ahead.
sorry, I'm not even sure that I described it accurately. Actually, I'm just realizing. So I don't know. That's all I know at the minute, but I'm not sure I even know that.
Well, I mean, they're checking on us. You know that they're checking on us. Um, but
Yeah,
behind
put it
me,
in the comments below. The real story.
behind me is the sign Mental Health and Life, the podcast with me. So we're going to be covering. Um, we are covering issues about community and about loneliness, and as one of the focuses, but also about all the ways that we can find community to create better mental health. I believe that there's such a connection, and you do, Paul, you do too, Paul, between finding community, finding these outlets, and having a much more stabilized mental health situation for the individual and as a group, as a whole. All of these things we talk about are not meant to be just for an individual. They're meant to be the effect on community. And all of those things that affect community have a positive effect when it's positive on mental health. And in relation to that, they all have an effect on decreasing loneliness. So we've covered all three territories right now, and we're going to have
Oh,
people back, and we're going to pick his brain about 20 other subjects at least.
well, I mean, before
Yeah,
I drop off,
yeah,
thank you, Johnny, for the ways in which you have a passion and a heart to serve people, aligned with mental health, loneliness, all the things that we've talked about here. I just thank you because it isn't just, this podcast. You have
right,
other podcasts, you have other things that you have done, in
right.
recent decades and even throughout your life. So thank you for your work, brother.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, man. Okay, all right. We should play that song. Johans is our cameraman, by the way, our technical director, and he's sitting in East Boston, Massachusetts. I'm sitting in my office in Arlington, I'm sorry, Lexington, actually. And Paul is sitting in his cafe that he almost owns in Binghamton. Are you in Binghamton, or what's the town again?
It's actually Shenango Bridge, I believe, which is,
Just
a few
outside
miles from Binghamton. Yeah.
upstate New York or middle state New York. And
Yeah.
so three of
Southern
us are
tier.
in three different places. And we want to thank, of course, Johans. And we want to say Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year for all of us and everybody watching. Oh, and I was going to say we should be playing. That's right. Johans, we're going to have to find the famous Beatles song, Eleanor Rigby, All the Lonely People, Where Do They All Come From? It's a beautiful song, right? We all
Yeah.
remember that.
Thank you, Johan.
Okay. Thank you, Johans.
To a
Okay.
beautiful 2025.
Definitely. We need it. Okay. Signing off. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Okay.